Thank you for coming out to this very special panel discussion at the Left Forum 2018. This is the rebellion of the shithole countries. And by rebellion, we really mean it. We have some great panelists here who will share with you their thoughts, their tactics, and their strategies to rebel against this principle and kind of thinking in mainstream media that certain countries are labeled as certain things and other countries get labeled differently. So without further ado, Mamadou Niang?
Yes.
Great, I'm doing well already.
Thank you.
His abstract for his presentation is how the African community is responding to the Trump's offensive. The entire African continent is composed of quote-unquote shithole countries, according to Trump. This broad-based smear has galvanized unity and generated mobilization among the long-dormant expatriates of neighboring African countries around New York. So.
Yes. Well, thank you. This is what I call a counterintuitive sentiment in terms of being in the midst of an administration in America that nobody saw coming. And, we're here in a conversation that happens every year, but never probably in these circumstances. So I'm so happy to be here to discuss this topic, which is right in my space, but there are thousands of other topics we could have discussed as well, because we live in times that are incomprehensible in terms of how we used to deal with the material that comes to us in terms of the way we think, in terms of the way we live. America is a place now. I travel, in Europe, I travel in Africa. I was in Europe for about a week. This is a place that has escaped any kind of understanding. So coming from a shithole country adds another dimension to it. But in terms of in January 13, or 12 or 11, when Trump said that, we've never seen such a wave of outcry in Africa in terms of any Western leader have pronounced such a disparaging insult to an entire continent. I mean, you're talking about close to like 2 billion people now in Africa. So the outcry has generated such an incredible streak of denunciation. We have never seen 6 head of states in chorus reply to an American president. Not only Africa is not a shithole place, but this is really unbecoming from the supposed leader of the free world. For the first time, we heard the Organization of African Unity in chorus with a unified response to Donald Trump himself. It never happened before. Across the diaspora, in Europe, in America, in Asia, Africans were rebelling in unison against what Trump said. Now, if you look at it 6 months later, and then we realize that actually where we fail, I would say, is we have not been able to muster and galvanize the people to keep that unity, that response, and transforming into maybe a movement, or at least a synchronized kind of litmus, so we could see how we could have a standardized platform of action in terms of when these things happen again, what we could do. But I think also it has to do with the scattering nature of the African diaspora, which is probably very much different from the West Indian diaspora, which I'm very familiar in the city. Africa is 54 countries, and it's really more than 54 different cultures. And when they meet in cosmopolitan agglomerations such as in New York City or in Paris, we tend to live together, to feel the same thing the same way, but on the continent it's completely different. I have met Milton here in New York City. In Africa, we probably would have never crossed paths. It's just the nature of our geography and our ancient history. But that has also created, I think, dichotomy in terms of how we try to organize. I mean, Milton is an activist, an intellectual. I am not an intellectual, I'm a journalist, I'm not an activist, but we are platforms that we really share, there are things that we do together in terms of our new way of engaging our people. And it is not easy to bring them together in unison in topics like this. That's why when something happened that could have really be the essence of our galvanization, we're really looking for ways, a language, and the mechanics to see how we could bring the people together, not only to answer on a permanent basis, but to forge an alliance with our other brothers and sisters, the Haitian community, on the other Caribbean community, Martinique and Guadeloupe. This is maybe a pathway that we are trying to forge, how we're going to do it, how we're going to get there. But this is my concern primarily in terms of how we could forge a consensus to organize ourselves, to be able to respond to these incidents, to these insults, to these affections on a regular basis, ready to go. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. I really like the part where you explained that we have to be organized in order to counteract in the future if such things will happen. So in that sense, you're kind of almost betting that it could happen again, or it will happen again in the future.
Well, it is happening. I mean, this was an insult to 3 areas of the world, but this is, Donald Trump is insulting the world every single day. Now it's the Europeans, European Union, Canada. I mean, would you have really believed that the president of Canada would have, stood his ground and say, well, listen, you don't know your history. Exactly, that's what he said to Donald Trump. You don't know your history. So yes, I think that the insults as repetitious. I mean, they are ever present, and I think that it's a test. I think it is probably again. Some of us are saying thank you, Donald Trump, for finding a pathway for us to unify, to see how we could actually uphold this struggle. But thank you. Yes, I think the insult is permanent. I think the challenge is, what is our role now in terms of picking up this gift and see how we could organize our effort and mobilize and create a movement.
Absolutely. Mamadou, thank you so much. Milton Allimadi, I will turn the floor over to you. In defense of Haiti, yeah. Haitians and Africans must stand together. Normally, under civilian rule today, Haiti's independence, not unlike most African countries, is only on paper. It has no control over its political and economic destiny. It is no coincidence that the countries referred to by Trump as shitholes provide raw materials to create wealth and prosperity in the industrialized countries, primarily the United States and Europe.
Thank you for coming, sisters and brothers. Like my brother Mamadou, I welcome this opportunity as well. It's good to be amongst comrades. I know you're sort of preaching to the choir, but that is good sometimes because it allows us to reaffirm our commitments and to see what strategies that comrades are also considering or actually practicing. I have to go with what Walter Rodney actually said, which is that racism, which is of course a form of demonization, became a part of the production relationship in the 17th and 18th century when the enslaved Africans on plantations became the primary means of primitive accumulation to create the base and foundation that allowed industrialization. So racism, as Rodney said, may have been manifest in earlier periods in terms of individual attitudes towards non-Europeans, but it was only in the 17th and 18th century that it took that peculiar form of being an integral part of the production relationship. And why was that? Because obviously it was important to rationalize why people who appeared to be fellow human beings had to be subjugated, right? So it was practiced in Haiti, which had one of the most brutal forms of colonial enslavement by the French, and of course on plantations here in the United States. And what was happening? Well, C.L.R. James gives us much of the details. For anyone who has not read The Black Jacobins, I suggest it's a book that you need to pick tomorrow or today if you can, where he details the dehumanization, the most horrific forms of torture. And yet, at the same time, they are actually sustaining practically all of the wealth of France. The same so-called savages that were being demonized, right? The same thing here in the United States. Without the wealth created in the southern plantation, the US never would have been an industrial power. So the same people that were being demonized as the wretched of the earth were in fact and are in fact responsible for all the wealth that we see today, including the wealth that Donald Trump himself enjoys today. The same mechanism once again during colonial rule in Africa in the 19th century when the continent was partitioned at the Berlin Conference, 1884-1885. The so-called white man's burden, the alleged need to civilize these savages. And how was this being done? Under King Leopold, 10 million Congolese were murdered in this civilizing mission, at the same time extracting the wealth in the form of rubber and ivory from the Congo. The genocide of the Herero by the Germans in Namibia while extracting wealth. This was the precursor, of course, of what we later saw, in Nazi Germany during the extermination of the Jews under Hitler's regime. In apartheid South Africa, the same sort of demonization of the African population that actually created all the wealth that we see South Africa enjoying today. So demonization has always been part and parcel of the production relation. What Donald Trump is saying publicly is what they say privately all the time. There's nothing unusual in what he said. He just said it publicly. It's unusual because it's rare that a United States president says it publicly, but he was willing to say it because he knows they say it frequently, all the time. And why should it be surprising? If it is indeed part of the production relation under the capitalist system that we see today. So for example, when the New York Times characterizes the atrocities in Eastern Congo as tribal war, what does that really mean? What is a tribal war? I've asked them this many times. In fact, this is where sometimes you actually have to go into activism. You know, I would write personally to editors there, to the reporters, to the publisher, and they could not defend it. And eventually they started to correspond with me. And I see that they use that language less frequently now. Did that have impact, the fact that I engaged them directly? I hope so. But I say that to encourage other sisters and brothers that sometimes we have to go beyond and actually participate, and that we can individually and collectively make impact and change. Because under this so-called tribal war situation in Eastern Congo, guess what? Western countries were actually extracting resources illegally. So these were wars of convenience. And in this specific case, you had Western countries supporting insurgents coming in from Uganda and from Rwanda and using that as a cover to plunder from the Congo, just like King Leopold used to do in the 19th century. So yes, I thank Donald Trump for giving us this opportunity to come together, to strategize. As my brother Mamadou said, we gathered in the United Nations to protest with our sisters and brothers from Haiti as well, and from other African countries. And we said, Donald Trump knows what he's saying is not true. Why? Because last year in September, he said publicly, and anybody can look this up, when he met African presidents at the United Nations General Assembly, he told them, he said, my friends are making a lot of money in Africa. So he knows what he's talking about. Demonization is always used to cover, plunder, exploitation, massacres, and as we've seen historically, genocide as well. So that's my observation. Thank you, sisters and brothers.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I want to ask you a question about the demonization and what could be done on a consistent basis to kind of change that view, that world view, because they have done so much to put that label and to put that
Yes.
vision.
Yeah,
When people think, and if they were to close their eyes and envision,
Right.
this is what will come to their mind because of all the programming that has been done.
I'm glad you actually posed the question that way. I teach an contemporary, introduction to contemporary African history class here at John Jay. So in the beginning of the semester, I have each of my students write down, when you hear Africa, what comes to your mind? And they write it down, and it's, you know, the wild animals, drums, African music, safari. By the end of the semester, they don't believe that they actually wrote down that statement, because we teach them the reason why Africa was colonized in the first place, for raw resources after the Industrial Revolution, and the plantation regime they set up, as Walter Rodney said, all roads lead to the sea in order to extract resources, not to build the infrastructure in Africa. So they learned so much that I almost feel like it's a class that should be taught to every freshman student in this country. But absent that, I think we can make impact. For example, if we come out of here, if we create a listserv or even a very simple website where we individually critique articles that we see that still try to use that so-called tribal narrative whenever it appears in any of the major corporate media. And it will catch their attention. Because if you nowadays, and thank God for the social media platform, somebody likes the article and starts tweeting it around, it starts going viral, obviously the media entities involved will also become aware of that. So in as much as possible, any opportunity we have to push back, to expose them, I think it does have impact. So that would be my suggestion.
Wonderful. I don't know the brother on the end.
Yes, so my name is Chris Silvera, and I'm not even sure I'm in the right place.
Well, welcome.
But I was invited by Sister Colia Clark to speak about Africa, about China and what's happened in Jamaica and the Caribbean in that sense. But I like the conversation that's taking place, but
You're welcome to share your thoughts.
so at the end of the day, it's about one's ability to defend oneself and one's ability to participate in the dynamics of having wealth, right? Of having resources. So one of the things that happen here right now is that, A, we have to go back to a pre-Berlin Conference Africa, right? Because all of these countries are not configured in their original place, and they're configured in such a way to exacerbate tensions between nations, because these are nations. The Igbo, the Yoruba, the Ashanti, these are mega millions of people. They have more people in Nigeria than they have in England, right? So if you really break it down, if how can there be tribes in England be a nation, right? See, so there's a whole dynamic in which we're talking about slaves. There were no slaves. There were enslaved people. There were people who were enslaved. So we have to change the dynamic of how we come towards this whole situation. In the West, particularly in the United States, because the United States probably has, in terms of mass, the richest Africans in the diaspora. They're worth, I think they rank them as 9 if they were a separate nation. So what can happen if those Africans created a sovereign fund that would allow them to participate in utilizing some of the resources that exist in Haiti? We have nothing. I went to a conference some years ago when they were, this woman, Jendai Frazier, was being made ambassador to South Africa. And Jendai Frazier was an expert in African military affairs. I had no clue that Africa had any military affairs that anyone had to be an expert on. So it tells me that someone from some long time ago knew that there was going to be an AFRICOM, right? So there's a global struggle now between China as the ascending power in the world, let me not say ascending, as the ascended power in the world, with America on the descending side of that hill, with Russia still trying to figure out what side of the hill they're on, with Western Europe in essentially confusion, right? Because they're on the hill, but not sure if they want to try to go up the hill, hold on to where I am on the hill, or what. But Africans in the West have no input. When I went to this conference, Jendai Frazier was black. I was black. I'm a trade unionist. The only other blacks in the room were from the government. Every other private entity in that room was white. And I was amazed personally at the amount of information that they had on what was happening in Africa, right? So when you look at that and then you look at what's happening to the people here, we have no methodology. We don't have some independent ambassador from the what I want to call the Pan-African world now, right? So yeah, Jamaica's got a guy someplace, but if America stretches her arm, you know, they fold up, right? They can't even protect each other. You look at what's happening in Venezuela today, right? This country that has given them discount prices on oil for years, they still don't have the nerve to get up and say, yo, you can't do that. You see, so somewhere in the turnpike, until we have a wealth pool, till we have $1 trillion centralized in some fund, we will just be here bleating, and we'll come back next year and we'll have some new numbers to tell you about, but we'll still not be a part of a power play. And we need to centralize resources, dollars and cents, to become a part of this power play if we're in fact going to change the dynamics of the continent.
We should be scratching the elephant.
We can't even do that. Sometimes a pimple on the elephant's behind can be painful. We need to, at the very least, begin to become painful, right? We need to have some say. You look at what's happening in South Africa from Mandela to today. and people like Cyril Ramaphosa. I had a conference in Chicago back in '95, and Cyril said, Laban Mabasa says, Cyril Ramaphosa is a billionaire. And he says, not a rand billionaire, but a dollar billionaire. Well, how did you get that rich? I thought you were some union guy. How did you go from being a union guy to a billionaire in 3, 4, 5, 6 years? Really? Right? So we have to understand what's happening. Where's our input as the children of the continent, right? Somebody say, hey, you want to do DNA? There's a reason I don't do DNA. Because I might find out that I'm Igbo, and the Igbo don't like the Hausa, so no, I don't like the Hausa. Don't even know the guy. I'm born in Brooklyn, right? So we have to, as I don't do that, I want to see the continent in its entirety as home. And that everyone on that continent is my brother or my sister. I don't want to have any delineations, right? So we have, as a people, we have to turn this thing around and says, why are we even in adherence to the Berlin Conference? That was not in our interest in the first place. So, you know.
So my question to you, brother, would be the African Union. How do you see their role and maybe some initiatives that they're doing? Are they positive? Are they negative? I heard something somewhere that Gaddafi was planning to back to centralize like to have a dollar compared to the EU, compared to the euro. I'm not sure where that effort is right now, but what do you think about what do you think the African Union has been, how well have they been doing?
Gaddafi was a student of history, and Gaddafi understood that he was a descendant of invaders. He understood that very clearly. You know what I'm saying? He didn't try to pretend that, and he knew that one day in his, at least certain in his thinking, that those Africans, they call them sub-Saharan Africans, as if there is something happened in the desert. But he understood that there would be that change, that there would be that rise that would come again. And he wanted to embrace it, right? So if you look at what was Libya like in Gaddafi's time in terms of how they used their oil wealth compared to what it is now, right? I mean, if you look at Iraq, what was the gain to Iraq, right? What was the gain to Syria, right? So, maybe Assad was a tough guy. I don't know. I've never been to Syria, so I'm not going to judge him too harshly. But I can rest assured that if I took a poll of the people, they would rather have Syria of 10 years ago than what's happening today, guaranteed, right? So every region, every country has its own evolution. And we keep going and trying to make people into Brooklynites. They're not Brooklynites. They're not from Chicago. They're from Baghdad. They're from Damascus. We have to start to respect. And when I say by we as citizens have to say to our government, did you see this last military budget? Where is their money for housing? Where is their money for healthcare? Where is their money for education? Where is their money for anything else? If you put the tax cut on top of it, so that we have to start to begin to build a resistance movement. We have to start to begin to build not just a resistance movement, but also having some economic wherewithal to step into places and make things happen. When you're sitting on a certain amount of wealth, you can go in and start to buy a diamond mine. Okay. Because when the ANC, when the descendants of the ANC can see their face clear to go and kill miners, their power base,
something is upside down.
Something is upside down. Right? So we have to start to begin to have some thrust bigger than the State Department or equal to the State Department. We need to have some thrust that they can count on, that they can depend on. That we got to go to the World Bank. World Bank is not in the interest of the so-called third world. I'm not sure how we became thirds, because we're the fastest guys in the Olympics, but you know, but somehow we here in the West cannot just march and hold up signs. We have to start to create some economic dynamic that makes those countries have to think about how they behave. And until we start to do that, we will just be having these conferences because, you know, you can't put any money in the Swiss bank. Donald Trump can, Barack Obama can, George Bush can, Hillary Clinton could, you know. And those people, you know, there's a saying about what money does, money talk and everything else walks, right? So we have to have the wherewithal to talk, and to talk with a level of power and impact, absolutely.
Absolutely, brother. Kim Ives is a journalist with Haïti Liberté for his presentation from the 1980s, excuse me, to the 2000s. It's a very long time. How the Haitian community has risen up against racism in recent decades. In 1990, tens of thousands of Haitians crossed the Brooklyn Bridge and shut down Lower Manhattan. In 2018, 1,000 Haitians and their supporters again poured across the bridge to denounce Trump's racism. Their struggle, both in the US and in Haiti, is an example for people worldwide.
Thank you, PJ. I'm going to maybe diverge slightly from the script on the basis of what Mamadou, Milton, and Chris have all said. I think we're moving into areas which are very fertile for the choir assembled here. I should just give a quick thumbnail sketch of what happened after Donald Trump on January 11th called Haiti a shithole country, and the African countries shithole countries, and El Salvador, and goodness knows he might have kept going. At Haïti Liberté, which is a weekly, Haiti's largest weekly, it's also a sort of community center in Brooklyn. And we had a full house on January 13th when we called. People were really outraged and angered. The result was a march 6 days later across the Brooklyn Bridge. It was 20-degree weather, and yet a huge multinational contingent of North American parties, there were Guineans, Trinidadians, Jamaicans, there were a lot of Haitians, there were all nationalities came out and marched from Grand Army Plaza all the way to the Trump building at 40 Wall Street with the big gold letters, the whole 9 yards. The rally was a success in the eyes of those who participated. Everybody was very happy about it. But as Milton was saying, the energy ebbed, the emotions passed, and it became harder to sort of turn people out. And in the following months, we saw the meetings dwindle. We connected with the African groups, which are united in the United African Congress, where I met Mamadou and re-met Milton after many years. I think the unity that we saw emerge from those tentacles meeting, which we saw in the February rally that the UAC had in front of the UN. And we also had symbolically important. It wasn't huge in numbers. It was a heavy rainfall, but on May 19th, the Haitian community sent 2 buses, one from New York, one from New Jersey, and a lot of people came from Maryland and Virginia and Washington, D.C., for a rally in Lafayette Park across from the White House. And again, people were very encouraged and I could say emboldened and enlivened by those rallies, by both of them, the January 19th and the May 19th. And I think that in the same way as the other speakers have outlined the role of Africa, Haiti has also played this role in Latin America. Again, if you had your students write down their images of Haiti, it would be the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, rickety boats, whatever it is, that the images pounded in by the media for decades. But you wouldn't know it was the first independent nation of Latin America. It was the first black republic. It was the touchstone for the revolutions that swept the continent. It was thanks to Haiti that Bolivar had the ships, the guns, the printing presses, the soldiers to fight his campaigns on the continent. And in fact, if you look at all the countries of the northern part of South America, they all have the Haitian flag in them, with that red and blue at the bottom is all the Haitian flag. The yellow at the top is their addition. So Haiti has had this touchstone role throughout history as the country that really forges the way. And so I think as important as it would be to have this sort of universal fund or grouping or directorate, but a lot of it comes from, these were Africans, by and large, that carried out the revolution in Haiti, who have now developed an identity. The Haitian identity is extremely strong, and when you assault it, whether it's an attack on Abner Louis-Ma that happened in 1997, or the killing of Patrick Dorisman in 2000, or in 1990 when the FDA said Haitians are carriers of AIDS. People may remember the story, the 4 H's, homosexuals, hemophiliacs, hypodermic needle users, and Haitians. You're putting a nationality in a biological group. What could be more absurd? Well, the Haitians stood up. They carried out massive demonstrations along Eastern Parkway for a decade. The CDC withdrew the policies, but the FDA kept it in a clause somewhere, and it came to light. And so that's the way the Haitians have developed. And if you try to take something back, as Napoleon tried to take back to bring back slavery after it had been abolished, you are going to have a hornet's nest to deal with. So that's what happened on April 20th, 1990. Tens of thousands, I don't know that there was ever a actual number, but maybe up to 100,000 Haitians flooded downtown Manhattan, the seat of power of, we could say, the capitalist world. Wall Street was shut down. The FDA building the federal building shut down. City Hall shut down. Everything got shut down by this wave of Haitians that came across the bridge, which came to symbolize really the working class of Brooklyn coming and making their stand, taking the streets of the capitalist vessel, if we can call it, that is Manhattan or Lower Manhattan. And ever since, in these past 28 years, there have been many attempts. I mean, Sharpton has led some, and Jesse Jackson even tried once, and a number of others, but nobody has ever equaled that initial glorious march. So I think that the national identity is and that pride is very important in terms of mobilizing people. People have a real sense. Every Haitian walks in glory for what their ancestors did. But it has also created a little bit of an insular attitude, so that sometimes things may be going on in Jamaica or Africa, or et cetera, and they don't necessarily come out to march for that in the huge numbers they do for Luima or Dorisma or against the FDA. So once again, we have to thank Donald Trump for bringing together these different arenas with his statement, calling not only Haiti a shithole country, but including African countries, including El Salvador. So I think Rome was not built in a day, as they say. Our movement is still in its early, nascent, inchoate form. We have started. We have this panel as just one tiny little milestone, maybe on our growing. Oh, is that my phone? Just hit that thing off or whatever. Yeah, sorry, it's recording. So I think that there's great potential, and yes, we have these conferences and we see all the. But once again, and to close, I think that this movement has the ability to bring together something. And the movement that was formed on that night of January 13th, a long hours and hours meeting, was gave birth to this coalition, which was not called the Haitian Coalition, was called the 1804 Movement for All Immigrants. 1804 representing the beginning of the end of slavery. So it's a date that belongs not just to the Haitians, but it belongs to all humanity, because this was the date when chattel slavery began its death plunge over the course of the next century. Eventually, it was removed from the planet, even though other forms of slavery emerged. And in a way, that's what we're fighting today, that new form of slavery. And just to take up a little bit of what Milton was saying, we see how racism and this demonization is part of the production process. It's interesting that we see capitalism wants total freedom for its capital to go anywhere.
Right.
It wants total freedom for its commodities to go anywhere. But the other element of a capitalist economy, labor power, that's got to stay put. Nuh-uh. That's got to stay right where it is. So the working class cannot sell its power, its labor power anywhere. And that's the essence to me of the Trump message. Make America great again means we want to keep what we've got here. We're 4% of the world's population. We can eat 45% of the world's resources. There's a reason everybody's trying to come here. They want to take part in that, but we want to keep it for ourselves. We're ready to suck it out of you, but you stay right where you are. So I think this is the essence of our fight, and I'm glad that we have at least the beginnings of some sort of multinational coalition, which maybe will grow one day into something as grand as what Chris has outlined. Thank you.
So what's happening in Venezuela right now, just so you understand this, Venezuela still has oil, they're still selling oil, but the rulers of Venezuela, so forget Maduro. Maduro represents the masses of the people. Separate from that, so he'll get that vote and what have you, is the merchant class, the banking class. Those people create very immediate impact. They did this in Jamaica when Michael Manley was in power. So when you went to the supermarket, you couldn't get bread, you couldn't get soap, you couldn't get this, all the essential things that you need to survive every day. When you went into a supermarket, the supermarket was bare. The day after they unelected Michael Manley, those supermarket was full. They warehouse stuff. They take it off the market. They take it off the shelf to starve the masses of the people, to turn against the very individuals who want to actually bring them up and out of their impoverished situation. So that capitalist class, that capitalist world class, right? So when you look at Europe, I mean, they could trump Russia, and Russia has a lot of natural resources and has guns to protect themselves, right? And if they can corral a country like Russia, it tells you something about what can happen to a country like Venezuela. The ascendancy of China, what you're looking at right now with all this trade war, is simply America recognizing, I ain't no longer the Don. The new Don is Xi Jinping. That's just a global reality. If you keep borrowing money from me every day, you cannot be that rich. I have not seen Warren Buffett going to borrow too much money from Trump. So it tells you who is rich. So don't be fooled by this charade that Trump is playing. Trump is playing a hand in which he don't even know how to play poker. He's in a poker game and don't even understand the game of poker, right? What Trump is looking for is to be some form of a dictator. That's really what he's trying to. He's trying to hold on to something that's not being played by the rest of the world. So don't get caught up in this. But we as a people, and I'm going to say this again, if you don't have two things in this world right now, because the world is moving faster than ever, right, with technology, with computers. I mean, this phone right here, right now, this guy can send a video across the world in seconds. So the world is different. So if you don't have the ability, and because you hit on a serious point when you talked about capital having that freedom to move goods and services, but to corral labor. The unions don't understand that, right? So we call for, within these global contexts of trade agreements, that labor have the same rights. So if I'm an iron worker and work is drying up in New York, I can take my skills to Mexico. I can take my skills to Germany. I can take my skills to anywhere where we have trade agreements, and that labor has to be freed up in that context, because when you take what you know in New York, and by that I mean how much you can earn, the value of your labor, and take it someplace else, right? Because you look at like the bauxite industry in Jamaica, Kaiser, Alcan, they paid U.S. wages in Jamaica because people understood the value of their skill sets, right? So that's what labor has to do, and it's not doing it, and it has no mechanism. And in the meantime, capital is trying to destroy any ability of labor to have money to fight back. And that's what this Janus thing is really all about, to economically weaken the labor movement.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I think that's about as much time as we have, unless someone has another comment.
Can I just
Sure.
yes, to the African Union earlier question.
Oh, okay.
The AU, the African Union, is 55 years old, and the European Union is 61 years old. And look at the situation in which the European Union is. Organizations in such a magnanimous size are a process. And African Union certainly used to be OAU, the United African Union, under the aegis of Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere. Those momentous personalities in Africa no longer exist. We don't have a Jomo Kenyatta, we don't have a Mandela, we don't have a Cabral, we don't have those leaders that have spearheaded that movement. But it is a process. They just celebrated their 50th year, May 25th. It was born May 25th, 1963. And a lot have happened ever since. Now, I can tell you as a Senegalese, I have a West African passport that gets me to every West African country. So regionally, they're organizing together. They just in Arusha 1 month ago, set up a common market. So, I mean, I am advocating for the integration of Africa because that's the only salvation that brings us to the question that is being actually answered now, which means that the blockchains and the new technologies, the new paradigms since the early 90s, all of those are shiny objects that are distracting us for the main goal that we all share in terms of the African family. I find it in this country. I was at the opening of the lynching memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, and the Slavery Museum. I was startled by the idea that the visitors who were there do not even understand American history. I'm not even speaking about the white visitors, but the black visitors. The reason why slavery is not even taught in academia in this country is such an incredible lack of understanding of how actually black people around the world should learn to organize. I mean, you could see that in Africa when you talk about economics. You get a country like Senegal with 10 million people, and you get Gambia right next to it with 3 million people. How can they develop isolating from each other? It is impossible. So we have advocate not only for the integration of the continent, but we also advocate for the integration of the larger African family. Across the continents. It is flabbergasting if you see that lynching museum. We all must see it and understand why this country is never going to reckon with slavery. That is because it is not taught. It is not understood. We did not understand. I understood for the first time that 4 million slaves were still being enslaved when the Civil War started. It's absolutely unfathomable. So there is so much work to do in terms of our organizational capacity before we get distracted with this economic thing. We missed in Africa the agrarian revolution. We missed the industrial revolution in London. We missed the technological revolution. We cannot be distracted by the blockchain revolution. We have an organizational revolution to do before we can think about this.
Can I have a minute? I recommend people that are not familiar with Samir Amin to watch him on YouTube. There's one interview which is very...
Who's it?
Samir Amin, S-A-M-I-R, and then Amin, M-A-M-I-N. There are many videos, but one in particular that I recommend, an interview with a Tanzanian reporter. It's only about 35 minutes long, but you will learn so much about the African condition. You will learn why it is that Ghana, which produces pretty much all the cocoa in the world, does not produce chocolate.
That's right.
And it's by design.
Thank you.
And you will learn why Germany can claim to be the largest exporter of tea in the world when Germany does not produce any tea.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
You will learn how the World Bank and the IMF prevent African countries from industrializing. And it's not surprising. Why would capitalists want to create other competitors around the world when they can barely handle China? So I strongly recommend that interview with Samir Amin. The African condition has always been, as who watched Lumumba, the film, by Raoul Peck, the Belgian departing general, when he's fired, before he's fired by Lumumba, says, after independence equals before independence. The conditions in Africa are today the same as they were at the Berlin Conference.
That's right.
Africa is compelled by these institutions and prevented from changing the narrative because they provide the raw resources that the industrial powers use to build their wealth. That was at Berlin, and that is today in the 21st century. And Africans that have tried to change this narrative equation, we know what happened to them. Kwame Nkrumah, overthrown.
That's right.
When he said the only way we can build wealth and prosperity is by industrializing in Ghana. Patrice Lumumba, all he wanted was for Congo to get a much more fair share of the industrial products that were being mined by the Belgian companies. What happened to him? Murdered in the most brutal way. Thomas Sankara in the 1980s. All he said was this, and this was profound. He was at the Organization of African Unity Conference in July, 87. He said, the debts that are burdening us are preventing us from being able to feed our people.
That's right.
And to develop ourselves. So what we need to do is say, after all, some of these debts we inherited at independence. How could we be responsible for debts that we had no role in accumulating?
That's right.
So let's collectively go to them and say, we will not pay. But I can't go alone. And there's a short YouTube interview, and you'll see this, and you see other African leaders acknowledging that he's speaking the truth, shaking their head, sort of chuckling. He said, but if I do it alone, I will not be attending next year's meeting because I'll be dead.
That's right.
In October, he was dead.
That's right.
So I strongly recommend, Samir Amin, I recommend watching this short interview with Sankara at the OAU conference. Thank you.
Samir Amin was a Tunisian economist,
Egyptian.
Egyptian, I'm sorry, who lived in Senegal, actually, where I'm from.
Yes.
Yes. He was the dean of the economic department of the University of Dakar. I went 2 years in a row to his class. And actually, he founded Codesria, which
Yes.
is like the academic think tank of West Africa, where you will find the only place in West Africa where you will find French-speaking, English-speaking, and Lusophone-speaking scholars and students together.
Yes.
So thank
Yeah,
you for.
he's a great man. I like it.
Let me just say this, and China is practicing the same thing that Europe practiced. When you go to the Caribbean, they are bringing Chinese from China there to do the work. So that it's not like they're helping anybody. So don't think that China is doing anything different. This is about imperialism. And whether you're a Chinese imperialist or an African imperialist or a white imperialist or a French imperialist, you have the same behavior. A boxer is a boxer, a wrestler is a wrestler, and these suckers are here about wealth because China does not have the raw resources that exist in Africa. It does not exist anywhere else in the world. We have no control. In Jamaica, they have no control. In Haiti, they have no control. In South Africa, they have no control. This is about control. Two things get you control: money and a gun.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to be violent, but there's historic truth to what I'm telling you. All of the world powers, and anybody who want to tell you you don't need a gun, and I'm not talking about anti-gun here in America, I'm talking about having an army, right? There is no army. So any of these countries that stand up, you can step in and blow them away tomorrow. Whether it be Ghana, Jamaica, Haiti, Angola, you name it. The only guy that's still standing up right now globally is Cuba. And Cuba moved 10,000 troops from Cuba under the nose of Sam into Angola and stopped the South African army from crushing the revolution in Angola. Okay?
And they liberated South Africa.
And liberated, that's right. So, and the South African army, and this is coming from somebody who had been to Vietnam and actually fought in the war. And he said when he tried to join the South African army because he had racist tendencies, he thought that they said, well, you got to go through boot camp again. He said their boot camp made Paris Island look like a vacation. That's how tough the South African army is. And Fidel Castro, so what does Fidel Castro have? Independence? Because they can feed their own people? They're not running around trying to get Mercedes-Benz and whatnot. Hey, listen, it's a half a chicken and that's it. But that's enough nourishment till tomorrow, okay?